Hey, good morning. So we've been in this series called Frientimacy, and we've looked at the importance of friendship, and then we've looked at some of the barriers that are possible to get in the way of friendship. Last week we looked at then how we are to treat one another in relationship and blessings. And this week we're going to talk about friendship and community specifically within a church context. Like, what should that look like in a community of faith? So we have Christians here. Some of you have been following Jesus for a long time, been in church a long time. Some of you are still checking out faith. You're not sure. Either way, I want you to understand kind of what the biblical perspective is on friendship and relationships in a church community. And I want us to talk about the reason why we often don't actually see that play out. Got a friend of mine. His name is Nelson, and he's a pastor in New York State. A few years ago, he was traveling, and every time he travels, he goes somewhere, he tries to attend a local church there just to get a flavor for kind of what's going on. He loves to see how God is moving in different parts of the country. And a lot of times, he pastors a fairly large church. He likes to go to a smaller church just to see what's happening there. So he went to this smaller church in a southern state in kind of a strip mall. There were about 45 people there. He just kind of looked them up and found them on like Google reviews. And so he went one morning while he was in town to do some business, and he enjoyed it. It was great. People were very friendly when he came in. The worship team got up, small, it was just a couple of people, but they did a really nice job. And then the pastor got up and started to teach, and he thought the pastor also did a good job. But when the pastor got up with him, he brought a little bulldog and set the bulldog on the stage, and he kind of, like, the bulldog was like, had a leash that was kind of strapped to the podium that he had his notes and his Bible on. And he just started to preach. Didn't say anything about the bulldog, just started to preach. And every now and then the bulldog would just start barking, So he'd be talking about the book of Acts in chapter 4 or something, and then the bulldog would just go, and the pastor just ignored it. And so he's thinking, oh, okay, this is like a bit probably. Like later on he's going to use this bulldog as part of a illustration or something to talk about how we might get distracted from the Bible or something. I don't know. He's probably going to do a bit. But he does the whole sermon, finishes, unstraps the bulldog from the podium and goes and sits down. Band comes up, closing song, service is done, it's over. He's like, what was that about? So afterwards, the pastor saw a new person, so he came up to him and was like, hey, how you doing? And my friend was like, oh, I'm Nelson, it's great to meet you. I'm a pastor in New York State, just came to visit. He was like, hey, question for you. This is my first time, right? What was up with the bulldog that was attached to the podium? He's like, oh, well, this is my little dog, Cersei. He says, okay. Well, Cersei goes everywhere with me. I don't go anywhere without Cersei. He says, you bring the dog up every time you preach? Cersei goes everywhere with me. I don't go anywhere without Cersei. So well, don't you think it might be distracting for someone who comes in, or maybe someone would walk in and be like, I don't know if this is for me because this is like such a barrier? And the pastor looked at my friend Nelson and he said, sir, this is my dog Cersei. And if I have to choose between you and my dog Cersei, I choose Cersei every time. End of discussion. Somebody clap. Don't clap. That we should not. It's okay to love your dog, just not that much, okay? They're people too. They're not. Okay, so here's what my friend upon reflect. He's telling me a story, and then he was reflecting, and this is what he said. He said, Josh, I'll bet all of our churches have barking dogs that we are largely unaware of that new people pick up on right away. So I'll bet every church has some stuff in it that a new person shows up and they're like, oh, that doesn't look right, sound right, smell right. Like that seems off, that seems weird, that seems off-putting. And for many of us, we're so in love with the barking dog, we won't take care of it in order to get better. I want to talk today about community in the church, and I think most churches in the U.S. have a barking dog that prevents them from actually having good, faithful community. And I'm going to tell you what that is in about 20 minutes. First, we're going to go to the book of Mark. So if you have your Bible today and you want to read along with us, we're going to be in Mark chapter 3, Mark chapter 10, and then we're going to be in Acts chapter 2. Those are the three passages of Scripture that we're going to look at because we're going to look at this idea of Christian community. We're going to start with Jesus because if you're new here, that is what we do here. And we're going to move toward like the actual application and implementation of what it is that he taught. So Mark chapter 3, and just a little bit of a background on this, toward the beginning of Jesus' ministry, okay? And Jesus has amassed a bit of a following, and so we read this and start with verse number 20. Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered, so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. And when his family, so this is like literal biological family, his mom and his siblings, when his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, he is out of his mind. By the way, there's been this question, right, that people had to wrestle with for a couple thousand years. And the question is simply, is Jesus who he said he was? Is Jesus who the New Testament is? Jesus who the Gospels say that he is? Is he actually raised from the dead? Is he actually God? I mean, for most people, they feel like, well, he either lied about it or he was, deceived about it himself. He was crazy. He was a lunatic. Or he's actually God. He's the Lord. Like, that seems to be the option. But what's interesting is that over the last number of decades here in the U.S., we've tried to add a fourth option to that trilemma. That option being that, well, Jesus was actually just a really wise teacher. He taught a lot about love and peace. And his earliest disciples then wrote these Gospels, and they just fabricated events as they wished they had played out or as they wished they actually were, and that's the version we're getting. So it's not that Jesus is Lord, liar, or lunatic. You can kind of set that trilemma aside. It's that Jesus was something totally different than what's presented with us to us in the Gospels. But there are major problems with that particular approach. One of them is simply this. There are tons of details presented in the Gospels that actually work counter to the goals of the Gospels. Like, if you are trying to convince someone that Jesus is God, and that the disciples were his earliest followers, and that they then went out and tried to and they changed the world because of how empowered they were by God, you would want to constantly cast Jesus and these disciples in the best light. You wouldn't, for instance, write that his family showed up early in his ministry and they asked to take charge of him because they said, he is out of his mind, right? The only reason you put that detail in there is if it happened. It's the only reason to put that in. Also, how many places in the Gospels did the disciples, the first followers of Jesus, look like jerks or idiots? Many, many places. I actually find quite a lot of comfort in that because sometimes I feel like a jerk and an idiot. And so to see that the earliest followers struggle with that as well is really helpful to me. But why would you do that if you're trying to prop these men up as being great leaders in the early church unless it actually happened? So this is one of those details. There are many of these in the gospel. We won't spend a ton of time camping out here. I just want to say, it's little things like this that help me find the Gospels to be trustworthy. There's way more than this, but this is one of them. So his family's there. So then he gets into kind of a tussle with the Pharisees, a verbal tussle. They believe, his family thinks he's crazy. The Pharisees think he's possessed by the devil, right? So he's not a lot of fans of Jesus in this particular passage. We skip down a few verses. In verse 31, we read this. When Jesus' mother and brothers arrived, standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. And a crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, your mother and brothers are outside looking for you. And this next one, this is the ultimate slam, okay? Who are my mother and my brothers, he asked. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and he said, here are my mothers and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother. By the way, I've never taught this passage on Mother's Day because Jesus saying biological family doesn't really matter that much. What matters is the people gathered here. Isn't a great sell on Mother's Day and Father's Day. But truthfully, I can't point you to Jesus' 12-point plan for a happy family because he didn't have one. Jesus continues to point to his followers as his closest brothers and sisters. He does this all throughout his ministry. And then a few chapters later, same book, it's the book of Mark, in chapter number 10, this really rich young ruler comes to Jesus and he says, hey, how can I inherit eternal life? In other words, I want to, in the age to come, whatever that looks like, I want to make sure that I make the right decisions to get there and to live with God in peace and harmony. What does that look like? And Jesus says, well, you have to obey all the commands. And he says, no, I already did that. He said, great. Then here's what you need to do, rich guy. You need to sell all of your possessions, give the money away to the poor, and follow after me. And the rich guy says, all right, I'm out, right? It was a step too far. And then he goes on to the disciples, Jesus does, and he laments the fact that it's very difficult for the wealthy to pursue God and to end up in the kingdom of heaven. And it's not because wealth, by the way, or money is morally toxic. Money's morally neutral. It's that when we start to acquire money, so often wealth becomes an idol for us. We become more attached to money, prestige, the power, the status, the stuff that gets us. And we start to pursue it. It consumes too much of our life for God to become our highest priority. So Jesus laments this, that it is so hard for the wealthy to enter the kingdom of heaven, not because their wealth is inherently evil, but because wealth is so alluring. It just pulls you in. So the disciples are kind of puzzled by this. Wow, we always kind of thought of wealth as being God's blessing on someone's life. If wealthy people can't get into the kingdom of heaven, who can? They're kind of puzzled by this. And so Jesus then talks to them about their sacrifice. Because these are disciples who chose to follow after Jesus, and in doing so, they left behind friends and family and possessions. And in fact, the earliest readers of this gospel message, of this story, would have been persecuted by the Roman Empire, possibly have lost business connections, network connections. Persecution for them didn't just look like somebody thinking they were the weird Christian at work. Like there was a financial and relational cost to it. And so not only is Jesus addressing these disciples, but these early followers of his who would later rehear this account, they would be comforted by his words about the cost of following Jesus and also the gains. And this is what he says after that rich young ruler walks away and he's talking to his disciples in Mark 10:29. He says, "Truly I tell you, no one who has left home or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for me and the gospel will fail to receive 100 times as much in this present age." So right now, you'll receive 100 times more than you lost now. Not sometime in the future, not like in the age to come. There's other stuff that's going to happen then. You'll receive 100 times more now. 100 times more what? Homes, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, and fields, along with persecutions. That snuck that one in there. Oh, thanks a lot, Jesus, right? And in the age to come, eternal life. Now listen, some people have read this passage and believed that this was making some kind of promise about if you'll give stuff to God, God will give you financial stuff back, right? In fact, a number of con men, con artists, swindlers have tried to use this passage to teach what's often called a health, wealth, and prosperity gospel. And they'll say something like, if you'll just give to my church or my ministry or to me, like it won't actually cost you anything, right? You can write that big check or use that big credit card because you can't outgive God. Jesus said that if you lose possessions and fields and money and family for him, he'll give you 100 times more back. I mean, that's a good investment. He'll give you 100 times more back in this age. But I think that is a wild misapplication of this text and a misunderstanding of what it is that Jesus is actually saying here. Jesus is building off of what he has said all throughout Mark, which is that your brothers and your mother, your sisters, who are they? They're whoever does God's will is your brother and mother and sister. Okay, so if you have to leave your brother, mother, sister, wealth, possessions behind, here's what's going to happen because you're going to inherit 100 times more brothers, sisters, mothers, wealth, houses. Why? Because you're now in the family of God. And you've left your genetic family behind. Maybe some of you have left your genetic family behind, but you now have the family of God. And so you need a place to stay. Well, there's 100 people here who are followers of Jesus, and you're welcome to any of their houses. They'll make sure you have a place to stay. You need a roof over your head. You need food in your belly. You need clothing on you. Now that you're in the family of God, right? Maybe you had to leave a lot of stuff behind, but the family of God is going to take care of you. So he wasn't saying you'd become independently wealthy if you would just be generous to God. What he was saying is, for whatever you have to give up, whatever you have to forsake for my name and for the gospel, you'll find 100 times more than that in the family of God. What Jesus does over and over and over again, right, is he consistently redefines the family. He consistently redefines it. So your brother, sisters, mother, the people you're related to, they're great. Jesus would want you to invest, right? This is not an excuse to disown your biological family. It's not an excuse for parents to not have to put any effort into parenting because, they're just your biological kids. Like as easy and tempting as that would be sometimes, that's not what Jesus is saying. What Jesus is saying is your real family, the people that you are the closest to are the ones you've chosen, not just the ones that you happen to be born into or the ones that you happen to give birth to. They're the ones who have chosen to follow after Christ. And he consistently does this over and over and over again. Not only does he redefine family, I don't know what just happened in my throat, but it was pretty gnarly, let me tell you. Not only does he redefine family as those who choose to put their trust in him and follow after him, here's the amazing thing. The early church lives it out. This isn't just intellectual information to them. They actually live in this way. In Acts chapter 2 and verse 44, we read this. All the believers were together and had everything in common. All the believers were what? Together. Thank you all 7 people. All the believers were what? Together. We got up to 22. It's so good. And they had, what did they have in common? Everything. See, just stick with the highlighted text. You're doing great. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Why? Because if you lost that stuff for the sake of the gospel, you got 100 times more of it in this age because you took care of each other. That's what the early church did. They didn't just hear the words of Jesus and believe it in their minds. They lived it out. They sacrificed for it. They gave up what they had so that others would have enough within their community. All the believers were together. They had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. How often did they meet? Every day. How often did they meet? Every day they broke bread in their homes and they ate together. How did they eat? Together. It was a little bit of a curveball. Okay, they ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. This church starts as a radical, countercultural alternative to what everyone else was doing. The Church of Jesus ends up being an actual community that looked after one another, that built relationships with one another, that went deep with one another. And in doing so, it actually draws others in. In fact, as they are living this way out, the very next verse says this, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. There is a massive correlation between how they were living and who was joining them. How they were living and who they were drawing. Like there's just a massive correlation between those two things. They lived life together day in and day out. That's what the early church did. They had relationship with one another. They used one another to build each other up and to iron each other out, right? Because friends both embrace you fully for who you are, but you also act as sandpaper in order to hone down the rough edges and to get better. There are things about you, ways that God wants you to live and be, that you'll never fully live into without other people around you who love you and care for you and they care for you enough to be truthful with you and honest with you about the ways that you need to think about shifting and changing in your own life as you faithfully follow after Jesus. That's how this community lives, and they do that every single day. Pre-pandemic, about 10, 15 years ago, the average churchgoer, right, who say a follower of Jesus and I belong to a particular church, and this is what the church is, attended about 3 out of every 4 Sundays. About 3 out of every 4 Sundays, they were in church. Post-pandemic, the average faithful churchgoer, this is someone who's, right, I'm a follower of Jesus and I have a home church and here's where it is. It's gone from 3 to 1.7 times per month that they're a part of it. Contrast that with these early disciples who met together every single day and were molded and shaped and formed every single day. So I just want to address the elephant in the room, and it's the thing that's probably like starting to work its way into your head, right? It's that nagging little frustration you're feeling toward me right now. It may be subconscious. You may not quite understand it. But as we're talking about, like, man, these early followers of Jesus, like, this was a way of life for them. Like, they chose to do it together. They had these deep relationships. And we've just been talking the last several weeks about how so many people these days don't have any friends at all. They don't even have one friend that they can confidently go to and share everything they need to and be fully vulnerable with, like massive portion of the population. Depending on the study, it's between 25 and 45% of the population has nobody that they can talk to. That's the world that we're living in. And these followers of Jesus were doing it every single day. When that leaves this like nagging little frustration you're feeling toward me, and here's the frustration you're feeling, just at the back of your mind, are we gonna talk about it? Are we gonna mention it? Because this is, here's the frustration. I don't have the time. That's how you're feeling because that's how I feel. I don't have the time. Like, if I come to you and I say, like, hey, the early church, in order to be faithful, in order to really live in community, this is how they allotted their time. You feel like, look, I am already as maxed out as I can possibly be. If you want me to be here more often or be in community with other people or to make space or make more friends, like, I just don't know how to do it. And here's the thing I want you to understand about the invitation of Jesus today. This is so important because, listen, almost all of us live with at least a low level of anxiety a lot of the time. Almost all of us live feeling like we have no margin in our lives. We're going to talk about that a little bit later today. Almost all of us live feeling a little bit tired, like we should have slept a little bit more, and like we should have done a little less, and that we still didn't get most of the things done that we needed to get. We like, this is a common feeling we all have in this room and online. I just want you to know that. Like, you are not alone in that. You are not alone with that. Here's the beauty of the invitation of Jesus. Jesus isn't inviting us to do more. Jesus isn't inviting us to do more. Here's the critical turn. Jesus is inviting us to do less. He's inviting us to do less. And that ought to feel like a massive relief to us. We have a friend of mine who says, you know, he hears this a lot. He's a pastor in the Northwest. Like, people, I don't have the time to jump into the church, to be a part of a group, to like build a relationship. I don't have the time. And then a lot of times the very next question he asks is, how much TV do you watch a week? How much TV do you watch a week? Now, listen, I don't know your specific example, right? Like, I don't know how much you specifically watch a week. So let's just talk about us, like collectively, and kind of what we do as Americans typically, okay? And not just TV, let's go beyond that. Like the average American, the average one, spends 608 hours per year on social media. That's just the average. 608 hours a year on social media. The average American spends 1,692 hours per year watching television. The average American lives to about 78 years of age. If you were to watch TV for 1,692 hours a year from the time you were born to the time you passed away at roughly 78 years old, you would have spent about 15 years of your life watching television. And look, I get it, because we are in a golden era of great TV. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Let's not even pretend that that's not true. I mean, I just, a few weeks ago, finished a wonderful show on HBO called Succession that I've been watching for the last several seasons. It's an amazing show. Here's what's also interesting. When I first started out in ministry, like 20 years ago, you could talk about a TV show, and almost everybody, like network TV, right? Almost everyone knew the TV show, like The Office, Parks and Recreation. People were like, oh yeah, I watch that show. Nowadays, there's a billion shows. I can talk about a show and like 5% of you will know it. You'll love it, but you'll know it, and the rest of you have no idea what I'm talking about. So I just finished Succession, awesome show. And then this last week, I've had 3 or 4 friends who are like, oh, you finished Succession. You know what you would love? You would love this if you love that. You would love this show. You love it. And suddenly I'm feeling like media anxiety. Like, oh my gosh, I've got to watch all these shows. They all sound amazing. I need to add them to my watch list. How many seasons is that? 7 seasons, but it's only 10 episodes apiece, and they're only 3 hours apiece long. Don't worry about it. It's only 50 hours of television. You'll have the whole thing down. 50 hours of television. Right? But like, you know what that's like? Like in the early 2000s, they called it TiVo guilt. This is where your TiVo player that recorded things like had racked up hours and hours of TV, and you felt like you needed to get through it, like it became a task list. Nowadays, we don't have TiVo so much, but we have Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus and Peacock, and Paramount has a thing, I guess. 4 people subscribe to that. That's fine. Like it's like there's all these different services. And used to, we were paying $100 a month for cable, and it was commercial ridden. What a terrible model. Now we pay $7,000 a month for these different services, and it's way better. Of course we watch a lot of television. Like there's always this fear of missing out, right? Like this happens a lot of times, but 15 years of your life, I got a feeling at the end of your life, there's not a single one of us who will be like, I never finished Yellowstone, blah, right? Like it's just not how it's gonna be. The average male in the United States, by the age of 21, will have spent 10,000 hours playing video games. That is about the same amount of time they will have spent in the classroom from 5th grade to the end of their senior year in high school. My kids, by the way, if I let them, they would see this number as a challenge. Oh, I can double that. Triple it, Dad. Just let me at it, right? How are you spending your time? How are you honestly spending your time? Here's what's so interesting. I think post-pandemic, I've had so many of these conversations. Post-pandemic, a lot of us spent 2 years not really doing anything we didn't just want to do. And we just got into a rut. We got into a rhythm and a routine. And now we are feeling more isolated, many of us more lonely and disconnected than we've ever felt before. And so we self-medicate with entertainment. Ironically, the thing that we're trying to make us feel better is preventing us from actually investing in the relationships that would actually make us feel better. We're using Excedrin when what we need to do, right, is have a migraine surgery in our head to remove the cancer that's actually giving us the headache. So we just keep watching more. We keep filling up with entertainment. Look, if you don't, I would encourage you. Like if you're not sure, most of us way undercount. I know I did. I did this a few months ago, actually. If what it was for me, it could be all kinds of things for you. Reddit.com is a website that I just find I can endlessly get on that thing and scroll because there's just so much different content, so many different subreddits, and reading comments, and especially basketball. Like I read about basketball there and world news, all that kind of stuff. It's just easy to get lost. And you may have I'm sure for many of you it's different than that, but you probably have a thing that you find you get lost in. If you'll do a time audit one week, you will probably be surprised at how many hours at the end of that week you invested in things that it was fine at the time, but frankly, it doesn't mean that much to you. If you could trade that lost time for something that was meaningful, you do it in a heartbeat, but because it happens bit by bit, sip by sip, drop by drop, it just doesn't feel like it's that much, but when you add it up, it really, really is. Here's the reality, right? You can't do it all. You may have all kinds of things that you're interested in seeing. And look, you can't watch it all, right? You can't consume it all. You can't eat at every restaurant. Social media has made this worse, by the way, because we see what everybody else is doing. Oh, that looks fun. That looks awesome. Oh, I'm so jealous. I graduated from college with that guy, and he got to go to Italy before I did. I know where we're going next summer, right? It's just like you can't do it all. You will have to pick. And so it's way better to make choices, informed decisions about how you spend your time, energy, and money than it is to just drift into them. I read a fantastic book a few months ago called 4,000 Weeks, A Mere Mortal's Guide to Time Management. And it was written by a gentleman who has written about productivity for numbers of major publications over the years. He became a productivity guru. How can I be the most efficient with my time? And here's what he's learned over the years. He has tried every method you can imagine out there, Pomodoro method, every planner you've ever seen, every time-saving, time management method. He's done it all. Here's what he's determined. None of it matters. And here's how he says it. Oliver Berkman, he says this: convenience culture seduces us into imagining that we might find room for everything important by eliminating only life's tedious tasks. But it's a lie. It's a lie. You have to choose a few things, sacrifice everything else, and deal with the inevitable sense of loss that results. You can't do it all. I can't do it all. And we just think like, well, what if I got really good at that thing or really efficient at that thing, that would free up more time, and then I could do more of this other stuff that really matters to me a lot. Here's the point he makes. Let's say you get really awesome at email, okay? And you become the kind of person that people know if I email them, I'm gonna hear back from them within 20 minutes. You know what your reward is for getting really awesome and really efficient at email? You have to send in and receive more emails, okay? You don't spend less time doing it, you just get through more in the same amount of time. Or let's say you're a programmer working for a computer software company, and let's say you are twice as fast as everybody else on the team. Does that mean you get to work 4 hours and then just hang out and sit and chat for the other 4 hours? No. That means your boss says, wow, you did a great job. You can have a bonus. Also, here's twice the work you were doing before because you have all these extra hours. And this is not an argument for not trying in life. That's not what I'm saying. It's just the reality that like you will, if you think like, if I could just get more efficient, just better at a few things, if I could just manage my time a little bit better, it would free up all this other stuff. You will just keep filling the bucket unless you are intentional about choosing a few things, sacrificing everything else, and managing the inevitable sense of loss that will cause you to feel. Oliver goes on to say this a little bit later in the book. He says, the day will never arrive when you finally have everything under control, when the flood of emails has been contained, when your to-do lists have stopped getting longer, when you're meeting all your obligations at work and in your home life, when nobody's angry with you for missing a deadline or dropping the ball, and when the fully optimized person you've become can turn at long last to the things life is really supposed to be about. Let's start by admitting defeat. None of this is ever going to happen. Doesn't that feel good? Let's just name that that's the case. Get as efficient as you want. You will still have to make choices. Because no matter how efficient you are, you can't do it all. You can't see it all. You can't consume it all. You can't eat it all. You can't travel it all. You can't hit all the goals. You just can't do it all. So you have to choose. Over the course of this series, especially week 1, as I just talked about, how so many people lack friendships and how especially so many men, like 28 to say 65-year-old men, just really, they lack true, deep friendships. I've had a dozen, 2 dozen, I don't know, of you guys who have caught me in the lobby, or we had lunch together, or I saw you somewhere around town, and we're like, hey man, you could have been talking about me during that message. And I knew statistically that I was talking about lots of us in that message. But it hits different when you're actually looking someone eye to eye, and they're just naming, yep, I'm married, we have a strong marriage, my kids, younger. Outside of that family, I've got nobody to talk to about anything, really. So here's the question. How are you feeling when it comes to community? Are you feeling like lonely, disconnected? Are you feeling like you're wanting more? Because here's what I know about your life. Your life is perfectly designed to get the result it is getting. If this is how you're feeling, it's because this is how you're living. Your life is designed to get the results you're getting. Now look, I know some of us don't have much of a choice about the particular lifestyle we're living right now. Some of you are taking care of a very sick parent, or a very sick family member, and you just know, hey, for the next several years, I just have to invest in here, and that just doesn't give me much time for church community, doesn't give me much time for friends. It just doesn't give me, like, I have to do this. I get it. Like, for some of us, like, it is not an option. We don't have a choice, and I get it. Like, you are a victim of circumstance in that, and you do the thing, like right, put your hands and arms to the plow that you've been given. That's good. That's good. But for many of us, we haven't actually chosen to be lonely and disconnected and wanting more. We haven't chosen that. We've just drifted into it. And by drifting into it and staying in it, at some point, it does become a choice. It becomes a choice. See, for a lot of us, we'd like a different life. But actually getting that life is going to require us to live differently. So we want the life, but without the lifestyle, because it's the living differently. It's the lifestyle piece of it that's tough. A few years ago, my wife and I went to go see a movie, Wolverine. It was a comic book movie. My wife's she's fine with comic book movies, not her favorite thing. I'm fine with like romantic comedies, not my favorite thing. We have both, out of our sincere love for each other, just withstood a lot of movies that we just aren't that big a fan of, right? But we went to go see Wolverine with Hugh Jackman, and for whatever reason, I don't really understand why, but for whatever reason, my wife actually didn't mind that one at all. Really, the first time, he had done a few Wolverine movies. He had just never looked like this before. Hugh Jackman, he was Hugh Jacked, man. Like, it was amazing. He's what my 7-year-old would call, like, super swole, man. Like, that's what he was, right? He's just crazy ripped. And I remember shortly after this movie came out, there was an article in Men's Fitness magazine about his workout routine. And if you want to look like Hugh Jackman, you can't just wish that into existence. I have tried. You actually have to do stuff. And so he's talking about his diet, and he's talking about his workout routine, he's talking about his sleeping habits, he's talking about all this stuff. And like, he has eaten like farms worth of chickens. Like, he just protein nonstop, nothing else. Which means like he was living a different lifestyle to get to this life than you and I were at the same time. Right? When I was up late, like eating pizza with the family, hanging out, laughing, having a good time, he was having a single piece of celery and in bed by 8 p.m., okay? When I was still in a pizza coma the next morning and not getting out of bed, this brother was up at 4:30 in the morning to go to his first of 3 workouts he would do that day and do a total of 6 to 8 hours just of strength training and cardio every single day. You want to look like that? You have to live a certain way. Before, I use this particular image on purpose because before this specific scene was filmed, the shirtless scene, he didn't drink water for about 36 hours leading up to it so that his body would be as dehydrated and his skin would be as tight and his veins would pop as much as they possibly could. He shot this scene and then almost collapsed because of a lack of water and a lack of nutrients. I don't want to live that lifestyle, okay? It looks amazing, but the reality is, like, if that's what you want, there's a certain way you have to get there. Here's what we've forgotten in many of our churches. This is our barking dog. This is the thing that prevents people from experiencing the kind of community that the New Testament had and the kind of love and relationships and support and the iron sharpening iron. Like, this is the thing that's preventing it. This is the barking dog. We have forgotten that the way of Jesus was a way of living. It was an invitation into a particular way of life and prioritizing and reorienting everything around a particular way. It was never supposed to be just theological beliefs. It was never supposed to just live in our head. Pastor Eugene Peterson, who passed away a few years ago, but pastored for, 60-something years, was an amazing man. Buy all of his books. They're amazing. He says this. He says, the Jesus way, wedded to the Jesus truth, brings about the Jesus life. But Jesus as the truth gets far more attention than Jesus as the way. Right? It's why? Why is it so much easier to give like just mental assent to a set of propositions? Because it doesn't actually cost you anything. Oh yeah, I believe that. I believe that. But what Jesus said is like, those who obey me are the ones who believe me. Right? It isn't enough to just like believe it as a mental proposition. Like he is inviting us to reorient our lives around a way of living that he is pointing us to. It's what the early church did. It's why they met together every day. Gene Peterson says, like, we struggle with this. We've clung to the truth, but we've left out the way, which means we haven't been able to actually live the Jesus life. Jesus as the way, he says, is the most frequently evaded metaphor among the Christians with whom I have worked for 50 years as North American pastor. It is the barking dog. We don't follow after the way of Jesus. And one of the reasons we don't follow after the way of Jesus, probably the biggest one, is that we simply haven't created margin in our life to do it. We haven't prioritized it as a lifestyle. Margin, by the way, Richard Swinson defines it this way. He says, margin is the space between our load and our limits. Margin is the space between our load and our limits. In other words, like if your limit is 100%, right? You got 100% capacity, and your load is 80%, then you've got a 20% margin there. That's how that works, right? But for many of us, we just fill our limit all the way. We're already maxed out. We're at 100%. So if something else comes along, the opportunity to jump into a group with some other people, the opportunity to go to dinner with some friends, the opportunity to head to the beach together or to a theme park or to like take a trip together or to like grab a bunch of people and do a Bible study together or to pray for one another. Like if we have no margin whatsoever, like we'll always have to say no to those things because we've just maxed ourselves out. So for many of us, there is no space between our loads and our limits. And when there's no space between our loads and our limits, we actually don't have time to follow after the way of Jesus. We only have time to believe the truth about Jesus. The challenge being that Jesus over and over said you don't really believe the truth unless you live in it. James, the brother of Jesus, told us in his short letter that faith without works is dead. And it doesn't mean that you have to work your way to earn God's favor. That's not what James is saying. James is saying if you have faith in the teachings of Jesus Christ, then it will change the way that you live your life. Your priorities will shift. You will choose not to do some things so that you can do some Jesus things instead. That's how you'll live. That was the invitation of Jesus. That was the invitation of James. But when we don't do those things, it's really saying like we don't have time to be his disciple. John Mark Comer says it this way: most of us are too busy to follow Jesus. Jesus invited us into a way of living, a way of life, and a way of community. The things that we've been talking about friendship and iron sharpening iron, they weren't optional. They were part of what the early church did. But the reality is, like so many of us have been convinced, and frankly, we've been convinced by churches that struggle to talk about this. I gotta say, as a pastor, it's uncomfortable to talk about because the one thing I know about every person in this room is that pretty much every single one of us feels maxed out. So I know that like there's a lot of resistance to hearing this kind of thing. But I just want to mention, like there is a reward to living this way, to living with margin, to following after the way of Jesus. Here's what I say to you. If over the next 2 years, you would really commit to being here most weekends and to getting into community here, actually jumping into a group, experiencing spiritual formation, relationships. If you did that over the next couple of years, if you started to serve, if you started to pour back into other people, then after 2 years, you would be amazed at the amount of transformation that you've seen in your life. However, if you just come 1.7 times a month or less, and you hear a few sermons and you worship a little bit, and Christianity for you is just about consuming content and believing a few things mentally, you will not see much change in your life at all, and perhaps none. Why do you think we have churches filled with people who claim to be Christians, but their lives don't reflect it at all? It's because they're not living the way of Jesus. They're only giving lip service to the truth of Jesus, and those two things are different. Like so many things in life, you will get out of it what you put into it. But the getting out of it in this case is something so beautiful and so remarkable. I just want you to experience it for yourself. A few years ago, I was in my small group with my wife, and it seemed like almost every family in the group that particular trimester that we met together was just going through a tough season. You know, Emily was pregnant with our youngest son at the time, and we'd gotten news from the doctor that he may not make it. Like it's a long story, but he had problems in the womb. His belly was filling up with fluid, and they didn't know if he was going to make it. He had like about an 80% mortality chance at that point. And so we brought that to the group in tears. And I still remember them gathering around us and laying their hands on us and praying for us. Another couple in the group had been struggling with infertility for years leading up to this, and that was a heartache for them that they were walking through. Someone else in our group, they lost their job during that trimester together that we were talking and praying for one another and being together, And let me tell you what that season was like. It wasn't easy. It wasn't fun. Like, our faith was never supposed to be a shield against suffering, but a pathway through it. And over the course of those many weeks together, that community embodied the love and peace and care of Christ to me and to those other families. We were able to be poured into, and we were able to pour into others. And it would have looked so different to walk those treacherous weeks alone than it was together. That's the beauty of Christian community. It's the beauty of Christian friendship. That's the beauty that the early church participated in, and that's the beauty that drew so many people into it. When they saw that, they wanted a part of it. The invitation is that you might actually choose to jump into Christian community, that your life might be transformed because of it, and that others might be able to surround you in love and care as you walk through difficulty and celebrate with you as you walk through triumph. Here at Verve City Church, we have groups. They'll start meeting together again in the fall. If you've never been in a group before, Rooted starts this fall. It's on Wednesday nights. I am giving you months heads up and notice that if you're not in a group, you may want to consider clearing your Wednesday nights in the fall so that you can participate in this. It will be transformative for you if you'll put in the time, the effort, the work. It really will. Hundreds of people in our church have experienced it, and they can tell you that that's true. We've also got a baseball game coming up in July. You know what? It's not a big commitment. It's a baseball game. But you got to start somewhere. Come see the baseball game with us. I know. It's not an Angels game, which means the home team might actually win. Sorry, Angels fans. You might actually make a relationship that night. Just the beginning of something, right? You might make a connection with somebody. Just the start. But we got to start somewhere. And the invitation is that as you start somewhere and take step after step, day by day, the love of Christ may become more real to you because you see it displayed in the people around you. That's where you'll find Frientimacy. That's the kind of church I hope we can be. May we walk forward and willingly choose to leave our barking dogs at home. Father, thank you for the time together today. Lord, thank you for this community. I was blessed by this community just this weekend, seeing some friends of mine rally around some other friends in love and care. It's beautiful. It's beautiful to see. It's beautiful to experience. It's beautiful to do. It's beautiful to be a part of. And so, Lord, thank you for Verve City Church. Thank you for these people. Like, getting to be a part of this church is one of the greatest honors of my life, Lord. I'm so grateful to be here and to know them. And I just pray, Lord, for those who are here but don't know others, Lord, would maybe today serve as a catalyst to say, like, man, I got to choose that as a priority. I don't need to do more. I need to stop doing some other stuff to invest in that because that's the way of Christ. And Lord, we just want to follow after your way. And I thank you so much that it is a way of living and not just a set of mental beliefs because, Lord, we know that we need our lives to be transformed to look more and more like Jesus. We don't drift into health. Everything worthwhile is uphill. So we choose to walk uphill in recognition that that's where you are, and that's how you change us. May we do it arm in arm, hand in hand, together, as brothers and sisters in the family of God. It's in Jesus' name I pray.